America is being overwhelmed. Not by war, not by recession, but by a silent flood of unauthorized migration. The border isn't just a line anymore, it's a revolving door. And despite billions in surveillance, drones, and border patrol, millions are still pouring in. But here's what they don't want you to know, it's not just Mexico anymore. A new global shift is transforming the U.S. immigration crisis, and some of the fastest-growing illegal immigrant populations are coming from countries that would shock the average American. From South Asia to South America, these 10 countries are driving the surge. Some are ravaged by collapse, others are gaming the system, but the numbers don't lie. And neither does the pressure this is placing on America's housing, healthcare, schools, and cities. So who's flooding the U.S.? The answers will stir outrage, and change how you see the immigration debate forever. Let's break down the top 10 countries flooding the U.S. with illegal immigrants. Number 10. Brazil. While headlines focus on Central America, Brazil is sneaking under the radar. As of the latest estimates, 195,000 unauthorized immigrants from Brazil currently reside in the U.S. But what's truly shocking is how quickly this number has ballooned, more than doubling since the mid-2010s. The reason? Political chaos and economic ruin. Brazil's inflation has spiked, unemployment has soared, and for thousands of Brazilians, the American dream, even illegally, feels like the only way out. The Biden-era border policy shift triggered a surge of Brazilian families taking risky journeys, including transcontinental flights to Mexico followed by dangerous treks through the Darien Gap. Many enter posing as tourists, then vanish, never leaving. Some pay up to $20,000 to smugglers just to get into the country. With weak enforcement and overwhelmed border patrols, Brazil has become a new gateway to the U.S. Why does this matter? Because Brazilian nationals are increasingly entering through legal loopholes, overstaying visas, or flying into Latin American countries and heading north. It's a global migration network that's adapting faster than U.S. enforcement can react. And cities like Miami and Boston are feeling the pressure, with school overcrowding and emergency room spikes. But what comes next will shock you. Brazil's current migration volume may seem modest compared to Mexico, but it's a ticking time bomb. As Brazil's political corruption deepens and its currency collapses, the illegal migration wave from this South American giant could explode. Number 9. Colombia. With over 201,000 unauthorized Colombians now in the U.S., Colombia's contribution to the immigration surge is more serious than most Americans realize. Once considered relatively stable in the region, Colombia is now struggling with cartel violence, inequality, and massive internal displacement. And that instability is bleeding across borders. The collapse of neighboring Venezuela sent millions fleeing, with Colombia absorbing the brunt. But many of these migrants then pushed further north, straight into the U.S. In turn, Colombians themselves are facing rising poverty, an underperforming economy, and eroding trust in government. For many, risking illegal entry into the U.S. seems more rational than staying in chaos. In 2022 and 2023, Customs and Border Protection reported record encounters of Colombian nationals, many of whom traveled through Panama and Mexico using well-established smuggling routes. Shockingly, some U.S. border towns have seen Colombian arrivals quadruple in just 2 years. Meanwhile, U.S. sanctuary cities are absorbing the impact, with local governments struggling to provide shelters and translators. Here's the kicker. Colombia's numbers were barely on the radar a decade ago. But now, they're surging, and the infrastructure to handle them is buckling. What happens when a country once seen as manageable becomes a major player in America's immigration overload? Number 7. Honduras. Honduras is no longer just a poor country. It's a nation overrun by cartels, political instability, and desperation, and the result has been a human flood pouring into the United States. As of 2025, over 447,000 illegal Honduran immigrants are believed to be in the U.S., and the flow hasn't slowed. In fact, U.S. border officials encountered over 200,000 Hondurans in 2023 alone, a record-breaking surge. What's driving this exodus? It's not just poverty, it's systemic collapse. With the government unable to control gang violence, entire neighborhoods have become war zones. MS-13 and other groups extort families, recruit children, and assassinate journalists. The only real escape is to leave, and thousands are risking the deadly journey through Guatemala, Mexico, and the cartel-controlled borderlands of the U.S. Southwest. And here's where it gets even more disturbing: children. The U.S. is now flooded with unaccompanied Honduran minors, many trafficked or sent alone by parents hoping for asylum loopholes. This has overwhelmed immigration courts, shelters, and foster systems across the country. Cities like Houston, Los Angeles, and even smaller towns are grappling with an unmanageable influx of underage arrivals. Despite billions in U.S. foreign aid to stabilize Honduras, the numbers keep rising. And every month, the U.S. is absorbing more people from a collapsing state with no end in sight. If Honduras disintegrates further, how many more will flood in before the system collapses on both sides of the border? Number 6. Venezuela. The U.S. immigration crisis cannot be told without Venezuela. What we're witnessing isn't just a border issue, it's the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere, and it's spilling directly into America's cities, hospitals, and shelters. As of 2025, over 545,000 undocumented Venezuelans are believed to be living in the U.S., a staggering number that's growing by the day. Venezuela has collapsed. Inflation hit over 400% last year. Infrastructure has disintegrated. Electricity and clean water are luxuries, not rights. Millions of Venezuelans have fled. And while most land in Colombia, Peru, or Brazil, an increasing share are using elaborate smuggling networks to reach the United States. In 2023, U.S. authorities recorded record-shattering numbers of Venezuelans crossing the southern border. What's particularly explosive is how organized the exodus has become. Human smugglers now operate vast pipelines stretching from Caracas through Panama, Mexico, and into Texas and Arizona. Some migrants claim asylum and disappear. Others never even apply. Many live in tents or informal shelters, especially in New York and Chicago, where local governments are overwhelmed and furious at federal inaction. And here's the real controversy. The Biden administration has granted temporary protected status to hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans, giving them work permits and de facto amnesty, triggering a backlash from cities already drowning in costs. America isn't just accepting migrants, it's quietly absorbing a failing nation. Number 5. Guatemala. Guatemala may not dominate headlines, but it dominates the border. This country of just 17 million people has sent over 1 million illegal immigrants into the U.S., and the flow continues relentlessly. In 2023 alone, Guatemalan encounters topped 250,000 at the U.S. border, putting enormous strain on agents and resources. Why the flood? Guatemala is caught in a triple bind of poverty, corruption, and gang dominance. Over 60% of the population lives in poverty, and remittances from the U.S. now account for nearly 20% of the country's GDP. In many communities, families expect their children to migrate north. It's part of survival. Entire towns are emptying out, feeding a migration system that's now self-reinforcing. What's even more alarming is how early the migrants start. U.S. schools, especially in states like Texas and North Carolina, report record numbers of Guatemalan children, many with no prior education and little English. This places impossible pressure on teachers, counselors, and local health systems. Meanwhile, adult migrants often work off the books, depressing wages and crowding low-income housing markets. The truth: Guatemala has become a pipeline country, both a source and a facilitator of illegal migration. Until that pipeline is cut off or addressed at the root, the flood will keep coming, and America will keep absorbing the shock. Number 4. India. India isn't what comes to mind when Americans think border crisis. But the reality is shocking. Indian nationals now rank among the top non-Latin Americans caught illegally entering the U.S. In 2023, over 96,000 Indians were apprehended at the border, an explosive rise of more than 1,000% over just a few years. Many more are estimated to have crossed undetected. These aren't desperate villagers, they're often middle-class migrants using high-end smuggling operations. India's economic growth is uneven, and joblessness is rampant among the educated. Political unrest, religious tensions, and corruption have driven a new wave of disillusionment, and thousands are choosing a high-risk escape to the U.S. How do they get here? Most fly to Latin America, especially Ecuador, and then pay up to $40,000 to cross the Darien Gap, bribe cartel escorts in Mexico, and sneak across the U.S. border. It's a sophisticated operation, one that American immigration policy isn't built to handle. Once in the U.S., many apply for asylum and vanish into the population. The scale is jaw-dropping. Cities like New York and San Francisco are seeing sharp increases in undocumented Indian workers, often in gig jobs or under-the-table tech roles. And while media coverage focuses on Latin America, India is quietly becoming one of the largest sources of illegal immigrants in America, a trend no one seems ready to confront. Number 3. Cuba. The fall of Cuba's economy is no longer theoretical, it's a humanitarian disaster fueling an unprecedented wave of illegal migration to the U.S. In just 2 years, nearly 400,000 Cubans have entered the U.S., with the majority crossing the Mexico border. Yes, Cubans are now flying to Nicaragua and hiking through Central America to reach the southern U.S. border. What's behind it? Cuba is in free fall. Electricity blackouts, fuel shortages, food rationing, and a collapsing healthcare system have triggered mass despair. The regime has tightened controls, banned protests, and jailed dissidents, forcing thousands to flee. And for many Cubans, the U.S. still represents the only hope of escape, legally or otherwise. The border surge has overwhelmed cities like Miami, where local infrastructure is collapsing under the weight. Shelters are full, hospitals are maxed, some neighborhoods are seeing dozens of new arrivals per week. The federal government has responded with half measures, creating new parole programs, but they've done little to stem the tide. Here's the kicker. Cubans used to arrive by sea, now they arrive through cartel routes. And unlike previous waves, these migrants are arriving with no resources, no sponsors, and no way to return. The U.S. is absorbing not just individuals, but the slow-motion collapse of a nation 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Number 2. Nicaragua. Nicaragua under Daniel Ortega has become a full-blown dictatorship, and that has unleashed a massive surge of illegal migration. In 2023, over 300,000 Nicaraguans were caught entering the U.S. illegally, a tenfold increase from just a few years ago. The trend, explosive. The cause, total political and economic collapse. The Ortega regime has imprisoned opposition leaders, crushed protests, and eliminated free press. Poverty and unemployment are rampant. The national currency is crumbling. And the result is a mass exodus of desperate citizens willing to risk thousands of miles in cartel-controlled routes just to escape. Many fly to Mexico directly, others come through Guatemala and Honduras. But once they reach the U.S. border, asylum claims soar. Many claim persecution, and while some cases are legitimate, the volume is so high that the system can't tell who's real anymore. The result, mass entry by default. And here's where it gets twisted. Ortega's regime has encouraged the migration. Why? Because mass emigration removes dissenters, and the billions in remittances from the U.S. prop up his dictatorship. The U.S. isn't just absorbing refugees, it's being used as a release valve by authoritarian regimes. Number 1. Mexico. Mexico remains the undisputed leader in illegal immigration into the U.S., with over 6 million unauthorized Mexican immigrants currently residing in America. And despite a decade of policy efforts, border walls, and military deployments, the surge continues, now fueled by cartel warfare, poverty, and government dysfunction. In 2023 alone, over 660,000 Mexican nationals were apprehended crossing the U.S. border. That's more than any other nationality, by far. And behind those numbers are human tragedies. Farmers fleeing extortion, women escaping cartel kidnappings, children trafficked for profit. The border is no longer just porous, it's become a profit zone for organized crime. The cartels now control entire migration routes, charging migrants, fees, trafficking humans, and even directing groups toward overwhelmed sectors of the U.S. border. American officials are outgunned and outnumbered. The result, a system that's barely holding together, with cities like El Paso, Phoenix, and San Diego collapsing under the weight. Here's the hard truth. Mexico is both a source and a funnel for illegal migration from all over the world. And until its corruption and violence are addressed, or the US finally changes its border and visa policies, the flood will never stop. What you've just seen is not a regional crisis. It's a global collapse funneling into the United States, driven by poverty, tyranny, cartels, and systemic failure. From Asia to Latin America, millions see the US as their only option, and they're coming, whether the law allows it or not. But here's the question no politician wants to ask. Can America handle this? The infrastructure is overwhelmed. The courts are jammed. Schools, hospitals, and shelters are cracking under pressure. And worst of all, Americans aren't even being told the full truth. This isn't about compassion versus cruelty. It's about survival versus collapse. The flood is real, and if we don't act, the next surge could make today's crisis look like a trickle.